listed earlier? Okay. Good afternoon, learning colleagues. My name is Diana Geshengo, an advocate of the High Court and the National Coordinator for the Institute for Social Accountability, TISA, who convene a coalition called Okoa Uchumi. The Kenyatta University Parkland School of Law is not new to me. We've had other conversations here, and it is lovely to be back and engage with all of you looking very, very sharp, and therefore I know Kenya is in safe hands, and I look forward to the moot competition tomorrow. Wangoi, what are the protocols? I sit or stand? Is it a court? Okay. Okay, I will stand briefly as I usher in. I am going to moderate the first panel. And the first panel seeks to discuss the connection between the lack of transparency when it comes to public finance and the continued violation of socioeconomic rights. To join us today, you're all lawyers, but you will learn very, very fast. We thrive by working in close collaboration and partnership with other professions. We are learned, but we only remain learned if we keep extracting as much knowledge as possible from other professionals. So my first panelist is Hilary Onami, CPA, the Director of Public Policy at the Institute ISPAC. Who knows the full name? Institute for? Certified Public Accountants, right? I can see you're truly going to be learned. So from ISPAC, and he will be here to share insights and help us see how the accounting and audit profession links with the legal profession, the human rights profession in the actualization of all rights, and in particular, socioeconomic rights. Hilary has been here since 11. When the panel moved, he did not move away because I have been with him for the last 2 weeks discussing how we rescue the education sector. So there is no way he was going to leave. So please welcome him very, very warmly with a factorial. Okay? Hilary, you can start catwalking to the stage, a factorial of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Karibu sana. My other panelist is Lurit Yogosok. Okay? She has a global name, and that speaks truly to her identity. She's a public policy specialist at the Institute of Public Finance of Kenya, a communication specialist. She understands issues of public finance, fiscal accountability, debt, and how we as young students can communicate what must be done to remedy it. You will benefit a lot from, she calls herself Mutu wa Kawaida, but as you will notice from her remarks and her contribution, she's very, very learned and very, very committed to using public policy and communication for the furtherance of accountability in public finance. Karibu sana, Lurit. A factorial for her as well. Great. Having said that, I will take cognizance of my age and my back and befit myself of these courtroom chairs. Now, I've not had enough time to find out some of the deeper questions that you as learning colleagues would like out of this. But having had the benefit of interacting with Kenyatta University students on a number of things, and based on our own research, I have told the panelists I will shoot the first 3 questions, and thereafter I will allow you to shoot questions, okay? And that way we can have a discussion that ensures that we are able to see what must be done to stop the continued violation of Article 43 of the Constitution. To begin with, I want to start with Hillary. Hillary, as you're aware, Article 43 is largely devolved because it has different rights: education, health, water, housing, adequate food, and so on. So it is a function of both the national and the county government. But allow me to pick on just 2 issues that are very pertinent. First is food. This country has a majority of the people nearly going to starvation. 60% of the population currently lives on a meal a day, and I think another 20% barely gets a meal in 2 days. Food security is a right. It has been a right for a very long time, since 2010. Yet people continue to starve. In the recent supplementary budget, they even prioritized disaster and relief fund towards food security. In your experience analyzing our public finance, what could be causing the continued violation of the right to food security? And secondly, we are in Kenyatta University School of Law. It was supposed to be one of the most well-equipped, what's the language for it? It also ought to, when they were advertising Kenyatta University Parkland School of Law, it was supposed to have the best infrastructure. I gather there were buses that are only found in Europe that were supposed to help comrades commute. Students were supposed to live in dignity and experience the noble life of the legal career. Unfortunately, right now, this school can barely sustain its research, their personnel, and these comrades, Hillary, they have to look for fare every day. They are on Fuliza, they are on Pesapay, they are on Hustler. What is happening to the realization of the right to education, particularly higher education? And their help is about to go away.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Diana, and I think it's a very serious discussion that it's a whole ministry kind of focus. So I don't know where to start in terms of food insecurity, and at some point I had also comrades are suffering, they're going hungry because health had delayed. So, but I think The issue about food insecurity in the country has been perennial, and since independence we've been fighting poverty, and related to it is food security. In the last 5 years, rather actually 10, food, let me say 5, because I think the Big Four agenda became in the second regime of Uhuru Kenyatta, and as a key priority area. And as a government, the Kenyan government had committed towards ensuring that there is sufficiency of food across the country. And quite a number of measures, if you look at the medium-term plan 3, had been proposed towards mitigating the issue about food security, and not been tapped. But let me go to, first of all, it's an issue, a perennial issue that government in from Maputo Declaration, we decided that we need to allocate sufficient funds towards agriculture, and actually 15% of our budget towards agriculture being a core contributor of our GDP, and a significant sector that employs quite a number of Kenyans, directly and indirectly. We have committed a sufficient resources towards irrigation, making sure that we produce continually and we are not reliant to rain-fed agriculture. But as it were, we know, I think today I just saw in the papers that the Kimorera and Anro case is yet to be determined. Yeah, and it said that significant resources, actually, I didn't want to paraphrase, because I think the president said, of course the country lost significant billions. The deputy president then, who is the president, said we only lost about 7, and that project never took off. We had Galana Gulandu irrigation scheme as well. We pumped in some billions towards making sure that about 1,000 acres are being fully irrigated, generating maize that was going to feed the country. Again, that became kind of white elephant, and until this year, we had to course for importation of maize. I think the maize scandal, you all know, it has continuously serviced itself. That every other year, about those of us that come from North Rift, we produce quite a number, maybe not sufficient to cover the entire country, but just before harvest, government causes importation. The prices of our maize becomes very incompetitive, and the farmers are unable to competitively produce. So I think 1, cost of input; 2, misappropriation of funds and insufficient allocation of funds; 3, I think the issue of agriculture, while it's devolved, there are quite a number of challenges that we continue to face in terms of inputs, as input subsidy, and right now I think it will be a course of discourse for you to deliberate into government's policy decision to not to subsidize consumption but production. Yeah, so shifting government policy, and a critical look at agriculture generally across the country, and we've done quite a study across the counties. You realize that 1, insufficient, it's the same challenge: insufficient allocation; 2, cost of inputs and production; 3, in terms of facilitation from extension services. Those of us who grew in early 90s or 80s and 90s, maybe majority of you are not born, we had extension services. And the crop that was employed in early 1990s is retiring, actually just retired, and county governments are not employing as much. So we have insufficient, I can say, allocations towards production as a country. And just to add that even though our country is about 20% and a significant of our land is in arid, and hence we were relying so much on irrigation so that we try to go away from rain-fed agriculture. Yeah, but as you could say, I can count the number of irrigation schemes that are working in the country. Water harvesting, we experience floods every year, but we never tap that water for productive use. So to me, it's a question of misappropriation, it's a question of misallocation of priorities, and it's not that we cannot feed ourselves as a country and export. I believe we have best brains. We could tap into the best technologies, but the perennial issues of corruption, misallocation, misprioritization continue to hamper us. So I don't know whether you want me to now proceed into the elephant of the education.
I'll allow you a breather so that comrades take that in. Do you know agricultural extension officers? Have you ever heard of such people? Not quite. You have heard of them. You're not too young, therefore. Okay, I am a daughter of an agricultural extension officer, so I really understand issues of farming. And thanks, Hillary, for pointing to us that corruption has continued to mar the agricultural and food sector, even when we try to push budget allocation to meet the threshold for the Abuja Declaration. Some of the mega corruption scandals are in this particular sector, and you've raised some of the most painful ones. I think the maize scandal is a series that continues to run. I don't know whether we are now in the maize scandal 11 or 12, like this moot court competition, and just a misprioritization and mismanagement of an industry that should be where we should be leaders. You can imagine Uganda is not as big as Kenya, yet permanently between Uganda and Tanzania, they feed us to a large extent, or we go all the way to the Asia region, import lots and lots of food, yet we have better weather that we can use to manage our food. So I hope that speaks to the problems that we have. And we won't touch on the laws, because if we go into the laws that touch on socioeconomic rights, like agriculture alone has over 100 laws. To do your thesis in that area, go ahead. But for today, we will not touch on the law. Lurit, based on this, and particularly how much leakages we have lost through outright theft, corruption, has taken this country to where we are. We are back to the 90s, where the IMF is now managing us under a fiscal consolidation process, which, whereas most of the money that has been lost or borrowed was utilized in mega infrastructural projects. Some of them around water and agriculture, maybe a few around education. Most of them have been around transport and everything. But that particular program affects socioeconomic rights. Today, I'm a bit obsessed with education and agriculture, which I know are part of what has been affected by this particular program. Could you tell us the effect of misappropriation and the painful steps that we have to take, and how they are linked to violation of socioeconomic rights?
All right, can you hear me? All right, thank you so much for that opportunity and the question that you've just asked. When you look at how different governments are using funds right now that is actually being borrowed, and it's not necessarily only Kenya, but very many countries in Africa, you'll notice that they are indeed financing mega infrastructural products. And the reason for that is because you'll notice that sectors such as transport, sectors such as education, health, agriculture, all of them are very much embedded in budget priorities in each country, which means that at the end of the day, development is focused on these specific sectors, which means that any fiscal consolidation processes or domestic resource mobilization processes are going to be geared towards financing development in these respective sectors. Now, in Kenya specifically, we've seen elements such as the expressway. We have seen elements such as the Standard Gauge Railway. We have seen very many elements on the same. We have also seen, I'm trying to figure out which other projects, which other flagship. Is it the Satellite City? That's the one. Is it the Satellite City? What is it called? It has a very specific name. There's Konza City that wants to be financed, and then there was, you'll notice there's a lot that keeps going on when it comes to infrastructural products. However, the problem is that we are borrowing a lot to finance the specific projects, which simply means that at one point, the government has to shift its focus towards paying for the debts that we have been trying to accrue to ensure that these projects are being taken care of. Now, whereas we may claim that we are paying certain fees, and levies to make sure that these are working and are able to give back to the government, at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that are mixed up in the middle of all of this. We can look at how the global supply chains have been very much affected in terms of inflation. We can look at it in terms of other kind of supply shocks being affected, and that's attributed to Ukraine-Russia war, COVID-19, and all those aspects. But when it comes to social economic rights, you notice that we begin to put in measures such as taxation, right? In as much as taxation is supposed to contribute to domestic resource mobilization to ensure economic growth and progress and all those elements, if we're not doing it in an equitable manner, it means that we are directly infringing in the rights of the people. And that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, how many people are complaining about inflation, high taxes? I mean, I don't know if you people have felt it, but I mean, we're feeling it in all kinds of pressures. The other element is, if you talk about the IMF, there's the whole idea of austerity measures, and that's one of the fiscal measures that have been put in place to control, critical issues when it comes to fiscal management. You'll notice when it comes to austerity measures, we have to sacrifice a lot of things, and that's when it comes to public expenditure. It means that very little is left to take care of the health sector, the education sector, and any other sectors that are meant to contribute to the country's development. What then does that mean for the public? What then does that mean for the nation? It simply means that the public is basically not going to meet their rights are just not going to be met. And when it comes to national development, it means that we're going to focus so much on debt servicing instead of national development, which is actually embedded in our areas of public priorities. Yeah.
Okay, I was learning with you. So thank you very much, Lurit, and you indicate to us that when you're in debt, for us who have pay slips, it means, and for you who are on help, the minute you get a salary, the government must come for its money. And debt is in the same category as tax. It is taken at source. Whether you have other priorities or not, it must be paid, okay? They say, Wahanga said, they said, dawa ya deni ni kulipa. It has no ICU waiting, no, you must. As you pay, priorities shift, and I think that's part of the reason why we find ourselves where we are. There are proposed reforms in the education sector. That is why the capitation that goes to public university has dipped significantly, and there are proposals to reduce the number of students who come in under COOPs, to rework help, because we are in a cash crunch. Now, Hillary, this is where you come back. And if you can help us, particularly around the education sector, the university sector, remembering where we were 10 years ago, nobody would have expected that most public universities would be where they are today, struggling. All of them were on a rapid expansion process. How comes this particular crisis, was it foreseeable? What was done to stop it? And what can we, comrades, do moving forward to ensure that lazima tumutaumia in this particular period, but you owe a duty to the next generation to enjoy better public education. So if Hilary, you can tell us, this is an area you have audited for very long.
Specifically audit higher education. But I think from our analysis in education in Kenya as a whole, I think one, we start with the government policy, and that has led to increased number of university enrollment. I think those of us that I think most of your parents could be, and by the time you're getting into university, I think we'll hear with nostalgia the stories about how Chum, used to be called Chum then, that guys will get a boom, and in terms of feeding at the university was 3 or 4 course meals, and life was good in up to late 90s, yeah, and then actually no, up to late 80s, yeah. Come 90s and 2000, things started becoming very serious. Funding to the universities had reduced, and allocations towards research and funding was limited, and increasingly, I think from 2003, Mwai Kibaki came in, and free primary education creeps in. I think Uhuru Kenyatta also comes in, and towards free secondary education, and the number of qualifying students increased significantly. First of all, our universities had not been increased in terms of infrastructure to take care of the influx. So the government finds itself in a catch-22. I think universities become innovative. They start Module 2 courses to try and finance the programs. It picks up until, I think, to 2016, and another government policy comes in to curb cheating, and I think some of you could be beneficiaries. The high-performing rates drop significantly, and we get the number of students that are passing with C+ and above reduced significantly. This normally government will take prior years take students up to B, B minus, B plus. Yeah. Right now, for both public universities and private universities, scrambling for C+ and above that are also reduced in number over the years. So first, funding becomes a challenge. The Module 2 crashes. They're no longer effective. And then we find ourselves, and allocations to universities doesn't increase. She talked about capitation, has remained the same for, I don't know, almost 20 years. So it doesn't factor in inflation, doesn't factor in cost of living, doesn't factor in high enrollments. Also, that right now, with reduced numbers, also the private universities are picking in students that will have necessarily be absorbed by public institutions. So I think it's a model that we need to critically analyze and see how best can we enhance our our education system in a sustainable way. And as you said, quite a number of universities had opened up quite a number of branches across the country and others outside the country. So that had to be closed down to different entities. So I think it is a crisis, as you say, that we really need to think through significantly, and also go back to the funding model. How do we first enhance the funding to universities? Second, how do we make them sustainable? And thirdly, how do we increasingly offer the courses that will be productive to the economy, so that even as you get out, you are not getting out to unemployment, but you're getting out to a productive sector that contributes to a thriving economy that will pay back in terms of research, innovation, and areas for support to the universities.
Thanks, Hilary. Wow, I had never even thought of it, that when the number of C+ is reduced, universities lacked clients. But it was a needed decision, and we celebrated the reinstatement of integrity in our public examination. But it resulted in the reduced number of students, yet public universities and private universities had taken advantage of the business opportunity. And I think in most economies that have strong education system, socio-economic rights cannot be driven by capitalist ideologies. Foundations of socio-economic rights have to have a different ideology, most of the time social justice as opposed to capitalism. Our days in university, the capitation was to go to fund PhD researchers and things like that. That has been commercialized. So it is going to be painful for us to reset and get to where we are. And I hope you can see public finance is not so removed from other processes of law, of governance. They are very, very much linked. It is just the function that finances or resources socio-economic rights. Lurit, final question before I allow these younger and more brilliant brains to be the ones asking questions and comments. You remember the Institute is a member of Okoa Uchumi. You have analyzed several things that are going on. What must to get back on the right trajectory when it comes to prudent public finance management based on where we are? So the institutions of government and the people.
All right, thank you very much, Diana, for that question. Yes, indeed, the Institute of Public Finance is part of the Okoa Uchumi Coalition and are heavily working towards ensuring transparency, accountability, and participation, basically just public participation in public finance management. Now, we can't ignore the fact that governments have indeed put together social, economic, and political reforms to ensure public finance management at all capacities. However, these are not enough. I could look back at a few examples that have been very relevant, and one of them is, let's say, automation of processes. We've seen that in the land sector. We've seen that a lot in the procurement sector as well. We've seen that in education. We've seen that in acquisition of public services. We've seen that a lot. Yet, for some reason, there's still financial leakages that tend to happen. At the same time, you'll notice that there's a very huge difference between allocation and expenditure. You'll still notice that there's still a difference in the quality of services that are being delivered. Why is that the case? And that's what we also ask. You'll notice that the government has also tried to put together critical ethics and corruption commissions to tackle issues that are geared towards corruption affairs and theft that's going on with public finance management. Yet, even those who are directly involved in these cases are actually not being charged and are even being given room to run for office. Why is that the case? That there's an element of performance contracting that, the public sector is really trying to borrow from the private sector. But still, you'll notice that there are some public service officers that don't necessarily meet the end of the bargain, but for some reason, they are permanent employees. If not, they are the ones trying to drive the public policy agenda. What then does that mean for governance? What then does that mean for, accountability and all those kind of measures? Whereas those have been put in place, you'll notice that we're really slacking when it comes to public finance management issues. And it's not Kenya alone, but just Africa at large. And that's why you'll notice that public service delivery is such a challenge with regard to how it is being, with regard to the quality of services we're trying to receive, from health to education to even just the transport sector alone. The other part is that there's no element of equity when it comes to the formal and informal sector and all those kind of areas. All these are public finance management issues. We can establish a nexus. Now, when it comes to what the government actually needs to do, is we need to go back to the drawing board and look at our fiscal policy stance. Does it have human-based rights approaches embedded in them? That's the first question we need to ask. Second is look at the governance framework. What is in our leaders? Are national values embedded in them? Is patriotism embedded in them for them to actually, hold the bar as high as possible and ensure that they're doing the right thing? How are we holding them accountable? That's something that we need to make sure is very clear. When it comes to our borrowing policies, are we borrowing for social good, or are we borrowing to individually benefit ourselves? Those are also questions that we need to critically ask ourselves. And when it comes to this issue of misallocation and misappropriation, how are we actually holding leaders accountable so that others who come into office are not continuing the same issue over and over and over? And when it comes to increasing the tax base, whereas as it's a very important thing to do within the current tight fiscal conditions, how can we do it in a way that we're not directly infringing in the rights of the public? And then again, there's the whole element of, are we involving the public in any kind of, policies, events, consultations that we have? And are we trying to meet the needs of the citizenry by creating any kind of development priorities, or are we just doing it for the sake of it? I think I might stop right there, but those are just a few sentiments that I may have. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive. That definitely we must work on living the spirit and the letter of our public finance laws, the accountability we envisaged when we started the reforms that were embarked after the Constitution 2010. It is time to bring them to fruition. That would entail a public participation law. As we increase the tax base, I understand a human rights-based approach to mean you shouldn't be taxing. It means you must leave nobody behind, and you start with the most marginalized. Ensure that they get the highest benefit out of any process. The current mechanism being put forward to collect taxes through VAT, taxing the informal sectors, are likely to cripple those who are most marginalized. And somehow, I think our public finance laws and processes protect those with a lot of money and power. They are the ones who are given tax incentives. When they negotiate, even their licenses are given amnesty because they will employ 10,000 of us. Then when they employ people and violate their labor practices. And then they are able to do a small settlement that is very much lauded because nobody else has the money to do the settlement that they have. But I do agree it's an area that needs a reset. Now, to the brilliant people of our centuries, it is your turn to speak, not to eat. To speak, and let us hear what you think about the nexus between socioeconomic rights and public finance management. Hands at the back, you're number 1, number 2. My youngs, ladies. Number 3, thank you very much. Number 1, number 2, number 3. That would be the first round.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mogesa Elvis, participant of the moot court competition. And my question is regarding when there are competing priorities between realizing these socioeconomic rights and maybe servicing the debt. What is the state's obligation in this? Like the statistics given that 60% only survive in 1 meal a day, but then the government has a debt and maybe they are defaulting in servicing this debt. So what are they obligated to do in this situation? Thank you.
We'll take all 3.
Well, good afternoon. The name is Odhiambo Asembo, and I have 2 questions. First of all, you have said that from your assessment, the 80s and probably early 90s were a good time in the education sector, yeah? This was before the introduction of these government policies, free primary education, the C+ thing, and 100% transition from primary school to secondary school. Well, we see that this was to probably to provide for access to education. But then there comes the problem that right now we are risking. Yes, I will go through primary education, go through high school, but then when it comes to university, according to the state as it is right now, most of them cannot complete it because there is less funding. So my question is, do we risk having high school graduates from having this free primary education and all this, or should we risk having a few but well-refined professionals in the job market, that we do away with free primary education, increase the level of grades needed to get to university, and do away with 100% transition? Less people will access education, but we'll have funding for the universities. At the end of it, we'll have a few but well-refined professionals. On the other hand, we'll have, everyone will access education, but it is not the level of education that is needed. So which one should we risk going by? The second, from your assessment, has devolution helped in promotion of socioeconomic rights, or has it just added to the number of people who benefit from the coffers directly on their own? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Third question.
Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Bwari, and I have a question. Okay, now you can hear me. I'm asking, what other less harsh method can the government use to repay debt, since the increase in taxes has resulted to violation of socioeconomic rights, such as the right to education? So the issue is not the debt, but rather the servicing of the debt. So which other less harsh method can the government use to repay debt? And the second question, if the government is saying that there is limited resources, why then is the government allocating 70% of the budget to repayment of debt?
Check.
One,
Okay.
2, 3, and 4. The rest we will, you're sure? Okay, 5, the rest we will interact in other ways.
Okay, by virtue of the fact that I'm already holding the button, I guess I'll start. So my question, my first question is a follow-up on the question that was posed by the lady, and I want to direct it to Laurette, I believe. You talked about debt servicing, that we now focus on debt servicing as opposed to national development. And I'm taking you back to the 2023 budget policy that was released recently. And they're taking a very different approach from what has been there before. Because as opposed to mega development projects, they are focusing on social welfare projects. Now, in your experience, is that the best approach to go about it? Is it really necessary that we do away with these roads, which we know in one way or the other will boost our economic sector on one side? Or secondly, do we go for these, making sure that these people actually have these socioeconomic rights at the end of the day, as opposed to that channel? The second question is on performance contracting and the issue of reinstating integrity in our institutions. And on that note, it is one thing to make recommendations and resolutions, and I believe that is what we'll be doing here. It's another thing to actualize them. Now, over time, we have had recommendations. We have had, since the days of the CRC, we have had recommendations being put forward. As late as 2011, we were still grappling with the issue of hunger, with the issue of drought, with the issue of housing. 12 years down the line, we are still battling the same calamities. What is it that we are doing wrong? And in that case then, what would be the best approach? Because quite honestly, it appears that the resolutions that we put in place are not heeded to, one, or two, if they are followed, then our implementation is wanting. So how do you tackle that?
Thank you very much. My name is Masai Cherotich. So I have two questions. I'll start with my first question. So recently, the debt ceiling was raised from 7 trillion to 10 trillion. And when the debt ceiling is raised, it means that it's an allowance to get more funds. So apart from us citizens maybe complaining and saying how the government is bad, do we have another voice? Because it was passed and it now became a law and it proceeded. So apart from us making noise, is there another way that we can voice out our issues? And another thing, you asked her a question and she responded very well, so she left me with more questions than even the answers that you had initially wanted. From our perspective as citizens, it is very easy to complain because it is the position we are in. And that's why we have like representatives in government, so that they can represent our issues. So from our perspective, it is very easy like to complain. And I believe maybe in this room, maybe a few or maybe 1, 2 government officials, but most of us are citizens here. So apart from the laws and the institutions that have been set in, and as you had mentioned, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, what else has the government done? Okay, what are they doing? Something that can help us, something that we citizens can work with. Thank you.
I'm Otieno Luke. Mine is a very short one. We've talked about the issue of corruption and mismanagement of public funds and all that. We've also talked about misallocation of priorities and all that. But now my concern is this issue of corruption. It's not a new phenomenon in Kenya. It's something that it has been an issue for too long now. And I tend to believe that even the 2010 Constitution was alive to this fact that corruption is not a new phenomenon in Kenya. And that's why we came up with this article that imposes an obligation on the government to ensure that it comes up with a progressive kind of steps to ensure that the socioeconomic rights are realized. But now as a nation, where have we failed? Yeah, where have we failed? Like for me, I think we failed to hold the government accountable. Of course, we are told that that government is supposed to ensure that the steps it takes are progressive. Have we asked the government whether those steps are progressive? For us as a state, I think, as a nation, I think we failed at that point. And finally, for us to service this issue of corruption, as a nation, we need to stop lamenting. We lament too much. We need to do something. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Jen Namai, CPM. I have a question, and it's similar to what Luke just asked. When you talk about the realization of socioeconomic rights, it's premised on allocation of financial resources. But then the government, day in, day out, lamenting that they do not have enough funds to facilitate the realization of these rights. What are we doing? What is that unique thing that we are doing to ensure that the government is kept in check and actually ensures that these rights are achieved?
Good afternoon. My name is Leticia Gashara, and I have a question. I believe it's Laureate, she talked about government taking loans, and I want to ask, how does government ensure that the loans are bearable? Because if they keep on taking loans and then use a huge chunk of the loan to finance another loan, and then the cycle keeps on continuing. So how does the government ensure that the loans are bearable, and where does it end?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Ian Daniel, so I've got two questions. Firstly, you've talked about fiscal principles. So my question is this just a creature, a toothless bulldog? What happens if the government is not faithful to those principles? Then secondly, you've also talked about the Public Finance Management Act, and you realize that in it, we've also got money in which tenders are to be issued. So the government has been issuing tenders. My question is, has that been done competitively or not? Because we've seen mega projects being taken by the Chinese and all that. So my question is it done it's not made public to us. We only get to see it in the news. And what's the consequence of such an action? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, very, very useful and pointed questions. I'll ask Lurit to go first and tackle all the debt questions. In as much as possible. I'm not sure whether you're our Shylock, our CBK, but please.
I feel like after answering this, I'll be appointed to the CBK. But anyway, thank you very much for those questions. And it's very interesting to see that you all have an interest in understanding what the nexus between public finance management and social economic rights look like. Now, these are very many questions, but I'll try and do you all justice. So let me begin with the competing priorities question, right? Now, if you look at the consolidation fund service, where a lot of public funds are hosted, you'll notice that debt is the first charge of all monies accrued within the state, right? That you have to service your debts before you proceed and cater to whatever you need to cater for. Let me use a very, simple example. How many of us have engaged in the M-Pesa Fuliza process? How many of us? Even me, I have. You haven't? Okay. Whenever you put money on your M-Pesa, what happens? What happens? Whenever you put money on your M-Pesa, what actually happens?
They have said.
Exactly. If you borrowed 600 and you put 1,000, just know that you're counting for 400 bob, not 1,000 bob. And that's really what happens. And it's as practical as that. If you look at even the Tala guys or any other kind of, lending financial institutions, they even call your parents, they even call your aunts, they call everyone. And that's actually what happens. And it's as real as that. Yeah? Which means that the first thing we need to be doing is servicing debts, and then we end up handling things like, social economic services that now lead to human rights. Now, the problem is we're compromising a lot, and it simply means that we're not able to meet the demands of our population. Then we ask ourselves, in what hands are we then safe? And that's where public debt becomes a problem. Thing is, what other less harsh methods can we use to repay debt? Guys, when you owe somebody something, they do not ask you in an apologetic manner. It doesn't happen that way. Not at the public level, not at the community level, not at the family level, and not even with your friends. And that's the same thing, right? We have external creditors, we have commercial creditors, and all of that. But remember, you're playing by the rules of the game. Whatever their requirements were when you are borrowing are the same requirements that they are coming to you with when it's time to pay back. And that's what happens, right? You've noticed even with just the simple borrowing processes, and I always try to make this as practical as possible. If you're borrowing from a bank, your car is at stake, your house is at stake. If you don't pay, what do? So they just take them, regardless of whether you paid 3/4 of the money or not. And that's the same thing. And really, when we look at less harsh methods, I'm not sure whether I can give you the most less harsh method, but there's a lot of policy conversations on considering domestic risk, focusing a lot on that as a way of financing, public service delivery as a more sustainable method. There's always that conversation that keeps going on. But is that really what's happening? At the same time, when we look at this kind of measures, we also have to go back and think, what kind of macroeconomic environment are we operating in? We've seen right now there's the whole idea of the dollar crisis. There's the whole idea of distorted global fiscal chains and all those kind of things, and they automatically affect all our decisions within the environment. And then within the 2023 budget policy statement, for sure, there's an element of social welfare that we can witness, right? However, that is not independent of things like political interference. It's not independent of issues such as human interference. It's not independent of the macroeconomic issues we are facing. So these particular measures that we're trying to put in place, how much can they respond to all those particular macroeconomic issues? That's also something that we need to constantly think about. There's the Hustler Fund that is really trying to ensure economic inclusion. There's the whole element of just trying to focus on education, health, and all these kind of priorities that have been set. But the same question lands. How much are we focusing on any other dynamics in our environment to ensure that these are met efficiently? And when it comes to the governance issues, are our leaders well equipped to ensure that they're making, first of all, they're using our resources prudently. Secondly, they're making the right fiscal decisions. Third, they are actually reporting, auditing, documenting, and all these things in the right manner? Is that what's really happening? Performance contracting, what is it that we're doing wrong? A lot. Are we focusing on meritocracy, or are we only focusing on popular vote? Is that a question we always ask ourselves? And sometimes it all comes down to the citizenry. Are you voting for the right people? Are we dealing with the right leaders? These are questions we have to ask ourselves. And that's why even you, wherever you're seated, have a responsibility, to participate in any elements of fiscal, growth of the nation and general national development. Debt ceiling from 7 million to 10 trillion. I hear you 100%. It's a challenge, sincerely speaking, folks, and we can feel the pressures at all levels, from how taxation is going on and all kind of measures that are being put in place to ensure that we're actually catering to all these kind of things. And you notice that there's that shift to, domestic borrowing, domestic resource mobilization. Everything is now domestic, domestic, domestic. But then again, you also have to understand the fiscal ecosystem. We have the global financial architecture and what it looks like. We're bound to the IMF, World Bank, and all these Bretton Woods institutions. Whose rules are we really playing by? Those are questions we have to ask ourselves, right? What are our priorities? Those are questions we also have to ask ourselves. We have to go back and also ask ourselves, are we in the right mind to cater to public needs? See? Wow. Can I let Hillary go before I answer the last one? All right.
Well, the issue about public debt, just like Eufuliza, government also is limited with resources, so it fulfills us. So, and the rationale of public debt is that sometimes when we are unable to meet our obligation, the government borrows, and the Constitution, PFMA, is quite clear on why we should borrow. Should borrow to finance development projects. But as it were, initially we have borrowed, but we could not trace wherever you borrowed to a specific project, development initiative. And there lied the problem and the challenge. If we're able to trace the 200 billion that we borrowed to a specific project that will serve this generation and generation to come, then that will be a prudent use of public finances. But the challenge has been, first of all, and I think we've been increasingly pushing to this, that we need to make our public debt book open, transparent, we're able to analyze where each and every shilling went into, so that the public can also play a part. We, in this current generation, as we trade off with the future generation, we're able to say, this is the far we can hold, or we can put the future generation into debt. Yeah. So it is a question that I think increasingly, given the voices that are going into this, we are seeing the public debt strategy subjected to Parliament, subjected to scrutiny, the Auditor General auditing the debt book, which has been opaque in the past. So I think as to whether and as she said, it's a fast charge. Yeah, whatever we collect as taxes go towards paying debt first before we cater for other services, and that has been detrimental to socio-economic rights in this country. So I think specifically to the questions that came my way, I think Odhiambo, you mentioned about the issue on access to education, and your proposal as to whether we could go back to where we could trade off 100% transition and education for all to education for a few, and I think we are past that stage. If we had not passed our Constitution 2010, which is quite progressive in rights, then it's a proposal that could have been considered. But increasingly, the world over, and that questions the need for education and the rationale. Our education is not meant for us to be employed, or for us to be drilled so that we can pass exam and go to university or not. Yeah, actually, all of us needs to it's a right for everyone to attain to the highest attainable education and quality education that matter. Yeah, so that our education is meant for us to solve societal problems, for you to be equipped with your worldview, to be innovative, and so that we do not rely on the very few jobs that the public sector can offer, or very few opportunities that could be available, but to make you be able to be innovative, to create wealth, and create employment in that matter. So our education has not achieved that. Most of us, it has made us dependent on white-collar jobs, dependent on, and that's where we need to start from. Is the education system serving the objective of education? So that I think funding will be other thing. But I think as to the policy, it's a universal right for everyone to access highest attainable and quality education. So we will not go back to that privileged few to come and domineer to the rest. Has devolution helped in attainance of socioeconomic rights? Well, I can tell you for a fact, I have traveled in this country pre-devolution and post-devolution. It's the best thing that has happened to us as a country, and actually it's one of the objects of devolution is to promote socioeconomic development and provision of proximate, easily accessible services across the country. Pre-2014, actually, most counties had no tarmac. Yeah? Come devolution, Wajir, for instance, got its first tarmac. Yeah? Some counties got their first hospitals. Some counties got their first universities, and thanks to devolution. The question about whether it has enabled more corrupt fellows downgrade, of course we have developed corruption, yes, but you cannot compare with the benefit that it has brought on board in terms equalization. Of course, definitely marginalization and inequity distribution of resources continue to happen, but it's not at the same level as at war when we had a centralized form of government. So to us, we need to continue sealing the loopholes on corruption, making sure that the resources that have been devolved go towards meeting the service delivery expectations and devolved functions, as it were, and ensure that our regions are developed equally. You understand we have an equalization fund as well that continues to increase resources to bring to the level of those that are developed, those marginalized areas. So to me, devolution is the best thing that has ever happened in this country. Is there less harsh method to repay debt? I think unfortunately not. The beauty is we just need to cut our coat. What is it? Cut our to according to our size. Yeah. So that if you're able to generate more, we should not actually. For instance, in this year's budget, we want to collect 3 trillion. Our budget is 3.2 billion, and yet we are only collecting 1.7 trillion. So what happens to the rest of the deficit? We have to borrow so that either we devolve to meet the aspirations, the budget expectations that we already put on ourselves. So I was expecting that if we're able to collect 2 trillion, we cut our budgets to 2 trillion so that we don't have to continue borrowing. And as she said, we're just paying off China. The other debt is coming to maturity. We still have to pay, go borrow and pay that one. We borrow from John to pay Mary, and again, it has been like the trend. Unless we come to the realization of, and of course we can, still low points, and I think that was the next question, I think from, is it Otieno? Yeah, that how do we stop lamenting and solve the question of corruption once and for all? We had thought that your generation will come and solve this quagmire, and apparently you are equally as corrupt. But I think it's not like we have insufficiency of laws. We have quite elaborate of laws, quite elaborate institutions in place to help fight the fight of corruption. But I think ours is a kind of, is it systemic? Yeah, that it's so intricate that for you to get some service, you have to corrupt your way into it. Yeah. But I think if we adopt technology, blockchain, and try to curb manual interaction with funds and processes, we could try in minimizing. I think the will is there. I think the spirit is there, but the will is not. So I think Leticia, how does government ensure loans are bearable? Yeah. So I think increasingly the government goes to borrow concessionally or unconcessionally. I think the commercial rates and the concessional rates. Those that are concessional tend to become cheaper, but with a lot of conditionalities. So if we don't want to tie ourselves to a lot of conditionalities, we go for those commercial loans that are a bit expensive and short-term. And that was, again, a contributing factor. So I think the government has resolved now it will go for the long-term and concession rates to finance itself. Again, relying more on domestic than foreign, which are subject to currency volatility. So there are some of the options that the government is considering, but we went commercial because it's easy to get, a lot of conditionalities. But if we want long-term, with IMF imposes a number of conditionalities that we have to meet, either increase our taxes or stop this and that we also be uncomfortable with. So it's a trade-off, really. And that's why all this going forward have to be subjected to Parliament, for Parliament to deliberate on and agree. In terms of whether we have it at a nominal value of 9 trillion or GDP value, it's a question. It's actually subject to debate, because definitely as such it should be based on our ability to pay, yeah, and not really pegged on an arbitrary number that we cannot tie ourselves in. But bottom line, we should have a debt towards development, and development that will be able to enable us produce more, enhance our economy, and we're able to pay eventually. As to the last question on Daniel, the fiscal principles, I think you talked about the issue of tender. in terms of procurement, I think the government made it clear and pronounced itself that this one will now be open through the procurement portal. You're able to know who the contractor is, what is the contractual value, what is the scope of the works, and you're able to participate towards whether the tenders were issued according to law, has the contractor delivered according to the specifications and to the scope. So I think there's the will to open up transparently through the public procurement portal on all the tenders that have been awarded to who and the tender values as well. So it's been work in progress.
Thank you very much. I think I'm being asked to wrap up, but I'll just add a few things to the responses that have been given by our panelists. First is because ECOSOC rights are rights and therefore obligations by government for its people. So when you have a debt and a human rights obligation, if you're a commercial entity, your business is commercial, it's contractual, okay? So there, the first obligation is to pay the debt. But for government, they still retain primary responsibilities around human rights. And that is why, for instance, if we move to court for an interpretation of a right, the government defense cannot be that we have to pay debt, because it does not negate their responsibility around human rights obligations. For that reason, Hilary and Lurit have spoken to the issue of concessional debt. Government is allowed to borrow differently. Concessional debt means you get a loan today in 2023, which you're allowed to do development for the next 10 years without repaying back a single cent. Why? Because the obligations of government and responsibilities are different from individuals and corporate entities. So the balance must be struck somehow, and we've seen other countries, Ghana, Zambia, Malaysia, that tried to just prioritize debt alone, come to the verge of collapse because at the center of government is the people, okay? So we will, I'm sure, we will get to the reset where human rights obligation must come before the debt. And there's so much they can do. They can come auction our port, auction us, but we must be alive. We must be alive through our socioeconomic rights. So it is an issue, it's an area that is still evolving. And if you recall, in this, was it in this particular hall, we had a conversation where already the international financial institutions, there is a conversation to see, can we get debt relief, debt forgiveness, because government must deliver human rights obligations to the people. As law students, please study this area. It is an area that is likely is developing very, very fast. And it's the reason why both Global South leaders and civil society are now engaging the Bretton Woods institution for reforms, because the debt burden is affecting us very, very differently. When you argue with policymakers, they tell you our percentage, whether by GDP or a debt ceiling, is very low compared to America. But because of their history of development, their reserves, their institutions, they can borrow that way and be able to pay. Yet they come and dictate terms after extracting from us for years. They give us conditions for climate financing that we cannot industrialize. Yet they have thrived and they are giving us loans because they are in economic justice is a conversation that we need to have. and we must have. I think that way I have captured a bit of the human rights obligation and less harsh measures. There will have to come a balance. But related to what Lurit and Hillary have said, you're learned people. If you come from a village like I did, that village is relying on you. When the CS Treasury comes forward to say we have the biggest budget in East Africa or Africa, please know, we are increasing our debt, we are increasing our corruption, we are increasing our violation of human rights. You have a duty to speak up. You have a duty to speak up until we budget within our means. We cannot continue budgeting like we are in dreamland and utopia. If you can assist us through that, legal minds in Kenya, whenever it happens, ingieni hapo Twitter, ingieni TikTok, tengenezeni hashtag, call out these leaders. We can't do it alone because we the people means we the people together. There are times the people you see on this panel, what have we done differently? Lots of things have been done around sociocultural rights. Our courts have made very, very many rulings that make sure our ECOSOC rights are no longer progressive, but they are accompanied by structural interdicts. I think this is already underway in the area of housing, water and sanitation, and I'm aware that litigation is being filed around education and health. Unfortunately, if for instance TISA is the one that gets the structural interdict for education, we cannot follow through alone. The resources of activists, civil society are very limited. So government just somehow deprioritizes it. It must be accompanied by the required pressure. The complaints must cease from complaints to consistent pressures. The students you hear, they were very few, but they use their intellectual capacity, their youthfulness, to be very patriotic, and they led this country from a dictatorship to a multi-party democracy. You can help us move from a state that abuses resources and violates ECOSOC to one where economic democracy and economic rights are protected through and through. So, and then the last one is, and I think, let me send out a shout out to, is it, Luke, you know what must be done. You know what we must do. Leaders, and I'm sure we will get there. The Public Finance Act and the Public Procurement and Disposal Act have very, very strong sanctions and guidelines around transparency and accountability, but the culture is very different. Some of the contracts that we are asking for, part of the conditions you hear, you get a loan from China and they tell you, every resource to implement this particular project must come from China. I understand for some of our projects that are at the coast, we even imported sand, changarawe, from China. Why? Because every single resource must come from China. In the last week, I joined parliamentary committees, and one of the things that we must seek is the Attorney General surely must draft contracts that are better for Kenyans. How do we import sand? If we import sand, what does that say? Now you understand why Chinese prisoners come to offer labor for things that we can do in Kenya. Those contracts have not been made public, and I think currently the Kenya Human Rights Commission and TISA, we are in court trying to get all contracts to be availed. Then muneza keti, the next moot court, mutuchambulie easy contract, you know what is wrong with our drafting, what must change, you write about it, then everybody at the AG's office, as they engage and sign those contracts, they will remember that we are marking those contracts. The chapter on public finance. Imagine the drafters of the constitutions were very clear that the public finance principles must have an intergenerational approach. We must bequeath the next generation better. We have tried our best, but I know for sure my children will have a harsher life than I do. But my mother tried to give me a better life. We owe it to this country to reform our public finance management system. Asanteni sana, and we look forward to your actions and supporting them moving forward.
Before I leave the stage, I'd just like to invite you all to engage with the work of the Institute of Public Finance. Please feel free to reach out at any point whatsoever if you want to discuss public finance issues. We have other people who may be well equipped in engaging your people, and even room for membership and frequent engagement on public finance issues. Yeah? Don't shy off from the process. There's a lot to learn from the practical bits of it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hillary, Ms. Lorette, and finally our moderator, Ms. Diana Gichango. So we are going to appreciate them with Diana's 5 factorial. I'm not very creative, so that's what we'll use. So the 5 factorial, and then we'll have Wangoi say something. Let's go. And then immediately she's done, we'll jump right into the second panel session because of time.
Hi everyone, my name is Rosalia Wangoi. I work with Diana. I'm the communications officer, TISA. I had an opportunity to speak to some of the students, and we were asking a question on financing higher education. So with that regard, we are going to be hosting a Twitter Spaces discussion this coming week on Wednesday, the 22nd at 7:30 p.m. And it's going to be a discussion about students. So we implore you, I request you, and I'm giving you the first invite. Kindly join our Twitter Spaces. You are our champions. You've asked very pertinent questions. When you get to our Twitter Spaces, we give people opportunity to ask the questions directly to the decision makers that we call for this conversation. So kindly join us and follow us on Twitter to get this information. Our Twitter handle is TISA Kenya, T-I-S-A Kenya. Follow us to get all this information. And after that, we will continue engaging and speaking to our needs and raising our voice, as we have been told today. Thank you so much. Wangoi Karanja from TISA.
Thank you very much. And maybe Wangoi can give an opportunity for one panelist at the Twitter space to come from this space so that they are speaking directly to their issue. Yeah, so I think they can give us later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll welcome our moderator for this, the second panel session. It's someone you so very well know. Sekimani Janga will be our moderator, and he'll be introducing the panelists. So welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're keeping well and learning so much while at it. So I know we are tired, so I'll request all of us to be upstanding and stretch for just 3 seconds, even as we prepare to get into the second panel discussion. So let's all be upstanding, stretch a bit, yeah? I know it's not easy sitting for quite so many hours, but you could probably use this opportunity to stretch a little bit. And yeah. Okay. Fine. We may all be seated. So, my name is Kimani Jenga. My name is Kimani Jenga. I'm a student to begin with at Kenyatta University School of Law. I am also the finance director of the All Kenyan Moot Court steering committee. And I want us to have a very brief panel discussion on the nexus between poverty and achievement of socio-economic rights. And joining me to have this discussion is a three-tier panel of very informed persons. And I'll begin by introducing them. Our first panelist for this discussion is Isabella Obara. She's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. She's also a human rights advocate and is very particular on the right to life and protection of the security of the person. She has also done a lot of work on police accountability, especially with extrajudicial killings. And she's also the lead litigation and legal advice counsel at IMLU. So let's all welcome Isabella Obara with hearty claps. Karibu sana Isabella. Yes, and it's so good to see you. My second panelist will be Ashraf Aziz from Amnesty International. He's a campaigner especially on human rights as well as inequalities and discrimination pillar. He has done a lot of work on the nexus between poverty and achievement of socio-economic rights. So let's also welcome Mr. Aziz with hearty claps. Yes, he's dressed very casually, but we could excuse him for today. Unlike the rest of us who are donned in suits. Karibu sana, and we are glad that you could make the time for us. My next panelist is Janice James. She's a colleague with Aziz, also works at Amnesty International, and does the same work with Ashraf on the nexus between poverty and achievement of socio-economic rights. So karibu sana, Madam Janice. Let's welcome her with hearty claps. Karibu sana. Please take a seat. Okay. Very well. So our topic for the purposes of this panel is how poverty is actually a doorway to violation of socio-economic rights. And I want us to interrogate the reason why we have the violation of socio-economic rights being meted on the most vulnerable, the poorest in our society, such that the poorest in our society are the ones who lack access to socio-economic rights. The poorest are the ones who suffer the brunt of police brutality. We have so much criminalization of poverty such that the people who are prosecuted the most and get very punitive punishment, even for very petty offenses, are the poorest in the society. So is it that they don't have a voice, or is it that as a society, we hate the poor that much? Yeah? So that's what I want us to talk about. And at the end of this panel discussion, we could probably come up with recommendations on how best we can prevent criminalization of poverty. So first of all, and I want to throw this to Isabella, particularly on police brutality being meted on the poorest in the society. We see in the news quite so often that someone in Kibera, especially during COVID, was murdered, someone was shot just like that, with no reasonable justification. So are we a society that says the worst, you can be anything in this country, but you can't just afford to be poor? Why do we have so much violence being meted against the poorest in our society, particularly police brutality?
Thank you, first of all, for the introduction. I want to say that we are very grateful to be back at the Moot Court. This is the 11th edition. I think we've worked together possibly from the 9th, if I'm not wrong, or even the 8th. So IMLU is quite 12. So many miners somewhere in southwest of South Africa organized themselves to push for issues around maybe some equality, because there was lots of inequality, unemployment, and poverty. What happened? After the 6-week period, we had over 36 people dead. Yeah, 36. You can't even have one person dead, 36 people dead. And that included police officers and mine guards. Therein lies your answer. You can't shoot at unarmed persons for the most part, right? 36 of them shooting, right? You're shooting at people who do not know how they are supposed to even organize themselves, yeah? You're shooting at people who you do not listen to. You're shooting at people who, when you tell, follow the system, you know how to manipulate the system. Therein lies your answer. Here are people who do not know what their rights are, and even if they knew very little, they wouldn't even know how to protect these rights or even affirm them in the event that they are violated. So tell me why you won't shoot at this person, yeah? Seated in this room, if someone walked in, you know, a trigger-happy police officer, and I'll give myself as an example, just seated as I am, do you think they'd shoot at me first? I feel like this society hates poor people. I feel like we genuinely hate poor people, and it's like we are socialized to literally just hate poor people to a point of our policies criminalize poverty. It's terrible. I know I've veered off the cuff, but going back to your question, in essence, we have continuously criminalized poverty, and it has been very easy to violate a person. So now, in terms of even what we saw during COVID, do you know of any person who was shot at or even had their house ransacked in Kileleshwa? But I'd give you very, very gory numbers in Mathare, in Kibera, in Kawangware, you know, in the slums in Western Kenya. And the numbers are quite staggering. So we have made it possible for violations to happen around persons who do not to enforce their rights. They do not have access to spaces that allow them to know how it is to recognize their rights and enforce them. I think I'll stop it at that, but when the questions come in, then I'd give you the statistics and the steps that possibly around which IMLU has been working on in terms of this particular topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's quite worrying that we hate the poor, yet we say poverty is not a mindset, that you find yourself poor. So one of the, in terms of discrimination, and I throw this to my friend Aziz, this poverty is not, the law prohibits discrimination on the basis of social status, but as a society, we generally have very low regard for the poor. So what do you think can be done to change the mindset and prevent this discrimination against the poor? Or rather, what has Amnesty been doing to stop or to provide further awareness to stop the discrimination on the basis of socio-economic status? Yeah.
I mean, first I feel like we should look at a point where we do not choose our socio-economic status. We do not choose where we come from. So we get to look at instances where people in Kibra, in Mathare, even we look at further a bit to Chesakwa region where people are being evicted from their houses just because they are poor. someone cannot really access the true justice that he would probably look for in a situation where he's going through financial instability. So if we are to actually eradicate or look for ways to eradicate this mentality that the poor are the worst people in our society, we need to look at the ready set policies that are there in our governments and in our gazettes as well, and understand that not only are we going to have to implement the ones that are already stagnant, but we also have to shed light to the stories of these people who are going back and understand that this is not a choice that they're going through. And they truly are the victims in our story, and we should really consider it when we are dealing with people who are from poor backgrounds as well.
Quite interesting point you've raised, that it's very wrong for us to have policies that discriminate against the poor, yet one, I think we have to agree, Janice, that we can never do away with poverty. I think this is something we'll have to live with. We can only try and reduce, but poverty will always be there. So considering that as a country or as a society, poverty is something that is so systemic that it's very hard to eradicate it. So what will you say is the role of state actors in examining discrimination on the basis of socio-economic status? And would you say that these state actors have lived up to their mandate of ensuring that one, we are undertaking steps to reduce poverty, and secondly, that even the ones who are poor at the moment have safeguards such that their rights are not violated?
Okay. Thank you very much first for inviting us and for the opportunity. Now, I'd like us to move away from the ideology of poverty will never end. First we need to start by attacking our mindset. Do we have to believe that poverty will never end, or it will just be there living with us? Number one. Number two, we also have to remove the idea of dependency. If there's one thing that I would advocate for all of us to champion for, is try and bring out the idea of self-reliance, where someone is self-reliant. They don't have to keep depending on nipatie 10 bob leo, nipatie 10 bob kesho. I really do not think that is a good way, at least for us to move ahead. On state actors and the government. So I'll give an example of an interview I was watching JKL last week. Mrs. Ochiel Ayako, from the governor of Migori, she said her main mentality is not, okay, changing the whole community might be hard, but at least that one woman who keeps looking back for a 20 shilling, because that is all she has, is the mindset that they're going towards. So that person doesn't have to keep back going to, akinimeacha 20 bob, no, so that they can also think about that 20 bob, what more can I get? So the question I would also bring to you is, are you also being able to change one person? One person is a gateway to like 10 people. We're normally told when you educate a woman, you educate the entire village. So when we also try to bring the government and the state actors, are they also trying to create opportunities for us where we can be able to be encouraged to get employment for ourselves? We are not being employed. Are you also getting an opportunity to create business for yourself? So first of all, I wouldn't totally go to blaming like exactly who is not working to eradicate poverty, but I would also say the state actors are also trying, but then at the same point, at some time we complain, we say we give them the chairs, they come give us money, we give them the chairs, but they're not acting as they want to. Because at the end of the day, you're thinking about yourself. So they're also thinking about themselves. Okay? Yeah.
Quite interesting. And this reminds me of my human rights law class when I was in second year, and especially on one, progressive realization of socio-economic rights, which ideally are geared towards, eradicating or reducing poverty and ensuring that everyone has, the right to live a dignified life and the right to have education, healthcare, high sustainable standards of healthcare, the right to, all the rights enshrined under Article 43. But again, we have a government that constantly says, wait a minute, we don't have the money to realize all. So I'll throw this to Isabella. What would you say, actually, is the nexus between realization of social economic rights, eradication of poverty, and ensuring that everyone has a chance to live a dignified life in light of the principle of progressive realization of social economic rights? Maybe you could start with progressive realization and explain to our audience what that means, and explain the mandate of the government in promoting that, and are they really doing that given the debt crisis that we've just been told about in our previous conversation, which obviously continues to affect eradication of poverty. Yeah.
I love the faith you have in me. Very bold of you to think I would espouse all that, but I'll try. Let me start from one of the questions that you asked one of the panelists, and you talked about discrimination. And this again, I would even throw to the audience. How do you tackle discrimination when we have institutionalized discrimination? How do you, we could sit on this panel, very beautiful carpet and everything, and talk all we want, but it's institutionalized, right? It's not just about telling Janice, we usifanye hivyo. It's more of now going to rip apart a whole system. Case in question. We know for a fact that at least 23.4 million Kenyans live below the poverty line, and honestly, I believe those are the statistics in January 2020, as per the poverty report by the Kenya National Bureau of Standards. I believe the number has gone higher, so let's work with, say, 35 million, yeah? We know that these people earn nothing more than 6,000 Kenya shillings a month, but we expect that they would pay say 1,000 bob to receive medical assessment at a public hospital. Really and truly, who will pay 1,000 bob? That's not money they make even in 2 days, right? So in that very policy or structure, you have already discriminated against this person, right? On the other end, because as civil society, we like sitting in our comfort and crying foul, but you look at a government that's heavily in debt, and they will ask you, so if we don't charge this 1,000 bob, how do we run this particular valid question, right? So they have a valid outlook, we have a valid outlook, then therein lies you and I just wobbling around some level of insecurity and lack of safety, right? And that not only access to health, it cuts across a security of the person, because if I drove into a police station in a Prado, even the watchman will tell me, Madam, weka hapa. But now you go in a boda, you could even be beaten. That in itself is part of the institution. They'll say, alikuwa anakaa mwizi. How do you then access legal support or even report a case or even receive support in terms of the security that there's? You can't even report a case. So I hope you see how discrimination works. It's not just about that I don't like a certain group of people. Maybe I don't like refugees, or maybe the school does not admit maybe people with disabilities. It's just the way it's structured. Right at the financial level, through to the socialization level, and we could even put the gender card, which is a long one. So now back to the question you asked me in terms of progressive rights. I'd like for you to ask it, then this, which I have just shared, would be a nice base in terms of now expounding two parts. And given the work we do as IMLU, I'll tell you why we think that some of those key rights therein would be what we can start with in terms of working towards a progressive space.
Absolutely. It's quite interesting that, one, I had not thought about the institutionalization. Yeah. Quite a heavy word there. Institutionalization of discrimination. And you find that the people who are discriminated against, particularly being the most poor, for example, if we talk about forced eviction, these are people who will be told, without due process being followed, actually, this land is being taken away. And Mr. Aziz, given that previously we had a government that was not so keen on obeying court orders, despite, okay, as advocates, you'll move to court, get an injunction, restraining the government from taking away their land, but not without even due process. So what will you say, what needs to be done in order to ensure that, one, court orders are followed, and secondly, that the poor even have a voice to
campaign we had on forced evictions last year. We were particularly looking at the Chisakwa community, where they were being evicted from the land they were promised by President Jomo Kenyatta. I don't remember the exact document, but they were given title deeds, and over the years, someone, just came and took over and decided to tell these people, like, you guys are going to move, and you guys are going to evade from this land. So now the people of Chiseka community are living in caves. You can go there and find a lot of women with no food, no viable means to actually fend for themselves. So because once they were removed from that land, that was the land that was actually feeding them as well. So now if you move someone to a cave where there's not really fertile land for them to feed their families, it becomes a challenge for them. So what we did at Amnesty, we started this campaign, and where we effectively had policies and documents that were sent directly to the president, and asking him kindly, because he really needs to recheck the deeds that were given by President Jomo Kenyatta, and effectively help these people. Because now if we sit there and decide that no one is going to look after these people and decide that they're going to fend for themselves, this is going to be very difficult for them, and this is why they are marginalized, this is why they're discriminated. So for them to have a voice, what we can do, probably you lead to the most viable organizations which are closer to people of action. So if these people reached out to Amnesty, where we did negotiations on their behalf, we gave them contacts to the media outlets, where now the media can actually go to the ground level and the grassroots level to find out that this is happening, document on that, and shed to light that this is what these people are going through. Those are some of the things we did in Amnesty to help this evicted community in Chisakwa.
Oh, quite interesting, and I really like the good work that you guys are doing in terms of giving a voice to the voiceless. But in as much as that is done, the civil society can only do enough. Most of the time, a lot of people don't even come out to say, actually, I have my land which has been taken, which now brings about the aspect of probably even some of the people who have their lands snatched away from them and they are forcefully evicted from their spaces, actually do not have a place to turn to and do not even speak about it. So will you say that the government is not doing enough, or what exactly needs to be done in order, one, to ensure that as a society, we respect the rights of others, especially occupation, and even whereby people are being evicted, the same follows due process. So what exactly do we need to do as a society to ensure that we basically have a sense of human dignity in all of us and do not put business
about institutionalization of the classes and everything. You see, if we were to remove that institutionalization, we'd create a law where it doesn't specifically say, like, you people, you behave like this, you look like this. So, like, let me give an example, refugees. If you look like a refugee, then you are supposed to behave in this way. You are limited to what you are required to have. So if this class can be removed, yes, they are refugees, but number one, they